The restraints around my wrists are cold, and I have stopped trying to guess how long I have been here. Counting hours only matters when you believe someone is coming. I do not believe that yet. I only believe in numbers, because numbers do not lie to me the way the researchers do. My name is Kira Voss. I am 26 years old. I was a xenobotanist on a survey ship called the Halden Vale, and 3 weeks ago, my crew and I answered a distress signal that turned out to be bait. Now I sit in a small gray room on a station that does not appear on any registered star chart, surrounded by people who study me the way I once studied plants. They call themselves Jureth. Tall, pale gray, with eyes set too far apart and voices that click faintly before every sentence, as if they are translating even their own thoughts. The lead researcher, a narrow-shouldered man named Dren Yol, likes to stand close to the observation glass and speak about me like I cannot hear him. Subject shows abnormal tolerance, he says, tapping a data slate. Elevated pain response should trigger vocalization within 4 seconds. It has been 11. I do not tell him that counting to 11 is easier than screaming. I do not tell him anything. Silence is the only thing I still own. The room has one door, one chair bolted to the floor, and a single black lens set into the ceiling, angled down at me like a small dark eye. When I first arrived, I thought that lens was my enemy. I thought it recorded everything so they could relive it later, the way some predators like to watch footage of a hunt. But somewhere around the second day, I noticed something strange. Every time Dren Yol reached for the tray of instruments, the lens shifted. Not much. A degree, maybe 2, just enough that its focus drifted toward the wall instead of toward me. I told myself I was imagining it. Exhaustion plays tricks on the mind, and mine had been awake for what felt like 40 hours straight. But it happened again the next day, and the day after that. Every single time something happened that I would not want remembered, the lens looked away. I do not know if a machine can choose to look away. But I know what I saw. You are quiet today, Dren Yol says, circling the chair. His clicking voice carries something close to irritation. Your species files describe humans as expressive, loud, emotional. I expected more. I'm saving my voice, I tell him, for something worth screaming about. He pauses. I think, for a moment, that I have surprised him, and surprising them has become the only entertainment I have left. Then he waves a thin hand at the guard standing near the door, a younger one named Petrick Shaw, who has not yet learned to keep his face as still as the others. Adjust the field again, Dren Yol says. Let us see what her threshold actually is. Petrick hesitates. It is brief, barely a breath, but I catch it. His eyes flick up to the lens in the ceiling before he moves toward the console on the wall. I wonder what he is afraid of. Not me. I am the one strapped to a chair. He is afraid of something else, something above even Dren Yol, and for the first time since I arrived here, that small flicker of fear in someone else's eyes feels like information. Information is the closest thing to hope I have. Do not worry about the recordings, Dren Yol says to him, without turning around, as if he heard the unspoken question. This sector reports to no one. The relay was disabled the day this facility was built. We are, for all purposes, unseen. I file that sentence away like a stone in my pocket. Unseen. He says it with such confidence, the way a man says a fact he has never once had to test. I have learned, in my short life, that people who insist too firmly on being unseen are usually the ones who suspect, somewhere quiet in themselves, that they are not. The procedure begins. I will not describe it in detail, because the details do not matter to the story I am telling myself right now, which is not a story about pain. It is a story about arithmetic. I count my own heartbeat. I count the tiles on the far wall, 17 visible from this angle. I count the number of times Dren Yol's voice cracks with impatience, because my body refuses to perform the way his charts predicted. Somewhere in the middle of it, I look up, and the lens has drifted again, away from me, toward the corner of the ceiling, where the shadows sit thick and useless. A part of me wants to laugh. Even the machines here cannot stand to watch. But another part of me, the quiet analytical part that used to catalog seed samples on distant moons, starts asking a different question. If the lens moves on its own, something is choosing the angle. Something is deciding what gets recorded and what does not. And if that is true, then somewhere, there might be a record of what that something chose to look away from, filed neatly next to a record of what it chose not to erase. I do not know if that is true. I only know it is the only theory that lets me breathe. When it is over, they leave me alone in the room, the restraints slightly looser out of what I suspect is procedure rather than mercy. My wrists ache in a dull, distant way that I have learned to set aside, the same way you set aside the sound of rain once it has been falling long enough. I lean my head back against the cold wall and look up at the lens one more time. I see you too, I whisper, so quietly that even the microphones, if there are any listening, would struggle to catch it. Whatever you are, I see you looking away. It does not answer, of course. It is a machine, or a very good imitation of one. But for the rest of that long, colorless night, I hold on to the idea that somewhere beyond this room, beyond this station, beyond the reach of Drenyol's confident little sentence about being unseen, someone is still watching the watchers. My people used to have a saying, back when I was training for deep space certification. Every human vessel, every human colony, every human outpost carries the same quiet promise stitched into its protocols. No one gets left in the dark. I used to think it was a bureaucratic phrase, something written by lawyers to satisfy insurance requirements. I am starting to understand it might be something else entirely. A warning, maybe, or a vow. I do not sleep that night. I count instead. I count the tiles, the breaths, the small movements of the lens above me, and somewhere around the 400th count, I stop being afraid and start being patient. Patience is a strange kind of weapon, but it is the only one they have left in the room with me. Morning does not exist here, not in any way I can measure by light, but a chime sounds eventually, and new footsteps approach the door. I straighten my spine. I decide, in that small private moment before the door opens, that whatever happens today, I will not give them the satisfaction of forgetting who I am. My name is Kira Voss. I am a Deathworld girl, they call it, in the clinical language of their files, because Earth tried to kill every single one of my ancestors 1,000 different ways before any of us learned to stand upright, and none of those ways succeeded. I do not know yet who is watching me through that small dark lens, or whether they will come in time, but I know this. They believed no one would see them. They believed the cameras would look away forever. They were wrong about the second part. I am about to learn, slowly and painfully, exactly how wrong they were about the first. The door opens, and Drenyol steps through with a fresh data slate and an expression that has already decided what today's numbers will say. I lift my chin and wait, counting, always counting. Somewhere, I tell myself, someone else is counting too. Before all of this, I had a life that felt ordinary, in the way only a life you are about to lose can feel ordinary. I served on the Halden Vale as a xenobotanist, cataloging plant samples on frontier moons that most star charts had not bothered to name yet. My captain was a steady, quiet woman named Priya Ferris, and my closest friend on board was a systems engineer named Colin Marsh, who used to bet me chocolate rations on which alien fungus would turn out to be poisonous. I lost more of those bets than I care to admit. 3 weeks ago, we picked up a distress call near a dead moon on the edge of Concord-monitored space. Standard procedure said we should have flagged it for a patrol vessel and moved on, but the signal carried an authentication code that matched an old research outpost registry, and Priya made the call to investigate. It felt like the right decision at the time. It felt like the kind of decision that gets written up afterward as an example of good judgment, not a mistake. The trap was efficient. I remember the shudder of the ship, the lights flickering amber, then red, then nothing at all. I remember Colin shouting something about the drive core, and then I remember waking up in a holding cell with a headache that felt like a second heartbeat behind my eyes. I do not know what happened to the rest of my crew. I have asked. No one here answers me, which I have decided to interpret as a kind of mercy, because the alternative answers are the ones I am not ready to hear yet. I tell myself these things in the quiet hours, not because dwelling on them helps, but because remembering who I was before this room keeps me anchored to the idea that I will be her again someday. Kira Voss, botanist, terrible cook, mediocre chess player, the woman who once spent 4 days memorizing the periodic table for a bet she cannot even remember the stakes of anymore. That woman is still in here somewhere. I refuse to let Drenyol's charts convince me otherwise. The days blur together in this place, but I have found small rituals that keep me from losing the thread of myself entirely. I recite the names of every plant species I ever catalogued, in alphabetical order, starting over from the beginning, whenever I reach the end. I do multiplication tables in my head, higher and higher, until the numbers stop making sense, and I have to start again. I hum songs my mother used to sing, though I am careful never to let the sound reach my throat, because I do not want to give Drenyol the satisfaction of hearing anything from me that sounds like comfort. He hates that I do not scream the way his files predict. I have started to understand that this bothers him more than anything else about me. His research, whatever its true purpose is, depends on data that fits a pattern, and I am the variable that refuses to cooperate. Every session, he adjusts something, changes an angle, tries a different approach, always chasing the reaction his notes insist should be there. Every session, I give him silence instead, or worse, from his perspective, I give him calm. Fascinating, he mutters one day, more to himself than to me, as he studies a reading on his slate. Cortisol levels are elevated, consistent with extreme distress, yet vocalization remains suppressed. This is either remarkable discipline or a defect in our translation of human physiology. Maybe it's neither, I say. My voice comes out rougher than I intend, but steady. Maybe I just don't feel like performing for you. He looks at me the way a man looks at a machine that has started producing unexpected output. Not offended, curious. It is the curiosity that scares me more than the actual sessions do, because curiosity, in someone with power over you, has no natural limit. Pain ends. Curiosity can go on forever, chasing one more data point, one more variable, one more edge of the map. It is during one of these long, curious sessions that I first notice Petrick Shaw watching me, instead of watching Drenyol. He is young, younger than the other guards, with a face that has not yet learned the trick of staying blank. Every time Drenyol issues an instruction, Petrick's gaze flicks toward the small dark lens in the ceiling before he obeys. It is such a small thing. A half-second of hesitation, a glance upward, a swallow before he moves. But I have nothing to do in this room except notice small things, and I have decided that Petrick's fear is the most interesting data point in the entire facility. I begin, in the quiet moments between sessions, to build a private theory about him. He is not like Drenyol. He does not believe, the way his superior does, that this station is truly unseen. Or, if he does believe it, some part of him is not comfortable with what that belief allows him to do. I decide to test that theory the only way I have available to me, which is to speak to him directly the next time we are alone in the room together. My chance comes on what I estimate is the 9th or 10th day, though I have stopped trusting my own count of days entirely. Drenyol has stepped out to consult with another researcher, leaving Petrick alone at the console near the door. I keep my voice low, almost gentle, the way I used to speak to nervous new crew members on their first deep space assignment. "You keep looking at the ceiling," I say. Petrick's shoulders stiffen. He does not turn around. "I am monitoring the equipment." "You're monitoring the camera," I say. "You think someone's watching, don't you? Even though Drenyol keeps saying no one is." For a long moment, he says nothing, and I think I have miscalculated. that I have pushed too far, and he will report the exchange, or worse, punish me for it directly. Then, quietly, almost too quiet to hear, he says something that changes the shape of everything I have been thinking since I arrived here. The relay logs were disabled, he says, but the storage arrays were not. Everything still gets written somewhere. Director Yol believes that means nothing, because no one is actively watching the feed in real time. I am not certain he is correct to believe that. He does not say anything else. A moment later, Dren Yol returns, and Petrick's face closes back into its careful blankness, as if the conversation never happened. But I carry his words with me for the rest of that endless day, turning them over like a stone I keep in my pocket, warm from my own hand. Everything still gets written somewhere. It is not rescue. It is not even hope. Not exactly. But it is the first crack of light I have seen since I woke up in this place, and I decide I will hold on to it with both hands until it either grows into something real or is proven false. That night, if it is night, I lie awake and think about what it means for something to be recorded and not watched. On Earth, in the years before I left for deep space service, there had been a long public argument about surveillance, about who had the right to watch whom, and under what circumstances. I remember my grandmother telling me once that the argument was never really about cameras at all. It was about accountability. About the idea that if enough time passed, if enough people looked away for long enough, cruelty would find a way to happen in the space no one was checking. The solution the Concord Treaties eventually settled on, the one Earth's delegates had pushed hardest for, was not constant observation. It was permanence. Everything recorded. Nothing erased. Even if no one is watching today, someone might be watching tomorrow, and the footage will still be there, patient and unblinking, waiting for the moment someone finally asks the right question. I did not understand, at the time, why my grandmother cared so much about that particular argument. She had never served off-world. She had spent her whole life in a small coastal town, growing vegetables and complaining about the weather. It is only now, strapped to a chair on a station that does not appear on any chart, that I understand what she meant. She was not talking about cameras. She was talking about memory. About the idea that a species which has clawed its way through every disaster the universe could throw at it does not build its systems assuming safety. It builds them, assuming someone, somewhere, will eventually try to hurt one of its own in the dark, and it makes sure the dark is not as private as the person doing the hurting believes it to be. The next session with Dren Yol is worse than the ones before it. I will not describe the details, because they do not matter to the story of who I am becoming in this room, only to the story of what is being done to me, and I have decided that the second story does not deserve any more of my attention than necessary. What matters is that partway through, I catch Petrick's eyes flicking upward again, toward the lens, and this time I do not look away from him. I hold his gaze for as long as I am able, and I try to make him understand, without a single word, that I have not forgotten what he told me. Everything still gets written somewhere. Afterward, alone again, I press my forehead against the cold wall and allow myself, for the first time since I arrived, a small and fragile shape of hope. Not hope that someone is coming. I am not foolish enough to believe in rescue yet. Just hope that somewhere, in a storage array Dren Yol has decided does not matter, a record of every single thing he has done in this room is sitting quietly in the dark, waiting. I think about my grandmother's garden, the rows of vegetables she used to tend with more patience than I ever understood as a child. She used to say that some seeds take longer than others to show themselves, but that did not mean they were not growing. I decide, in the flickering half-light of that endless room, that I am going to be patient the way a seed is patient. I am going to grow in the dark, quietly, invisibly, until the moment comes to break the surface. Dren Yol does not know it yet, but he is already lost. He believes he is studying a specimen that will eventually behave the way his charts predict, that eventually I will scream the way his research says I should. He does not understand that every session he spends chasing that data point is another session added to a record he does not control, Another entry in an account that is quietly accumulating weight somewhere beyond his reach. He thinks he is collecting evidence about Deathworld physiology. He is actually building the case that will be used against him. I do not know how long it will take. I do not know if Petrick will find the courage to do more than glance at ceilings and mutter half-sentences when his superior is out of the room. I do not know if the storage arrays he mentioned are truly beyond Drenyol's control, or if that is simply a story I have chosen to believe because the alternative is unbearable. But I know this. I am not going to break in the way they want me to break. I am going to remain exactly who I was before I walked onto this station, patient, stubborn, and quietly, carefully, counting. The chime sounds again, signaling the start of another cycle. I straighten in the chair as best the restraints allow and wait for the door to open. Whatever comes next, I decide, I will meet it the same way I have met everything else since I woke up here. Counting. Watching. Waiting for the moment the dark finally runs out of places to hide. My name is Owen Bright, and until the day everything changed, I spent most of my career doing a job that people rarely think about until it matters more than almost anything else. I am a monitoring officer for the Concord Oversight Division, stationed on a relay hub 3 sectors away from a small, unregistered research facility that most people would never have reason to notice. My job is not glamorous. I review flagged data streams, sort through anomalies, and forward anything unusual to the appropriate authority. Most days, the anomalies turn out to be nothing: a malfunctioning sensor, a misfiled report, a star chart error that someone forgot to correct. I had grown, over the years, comfortable with the idea that my job was mostly about patience, not urgency. That changed on a quiet shift when a routine diagnostic sweep flagged a storage array that should not have existed. According to the facility's registered documentation, the station in question, a small research outpost operated under a limited Zreth research charter, had no active recording infrastructure beyond basic environmental monitoring. But the diagnostic sweep found something else entirely. A secondary array, embedded deep in the station's original construction, still quietly logging data in a format that predated the current facility's official registration. It had not been maintained. It had not been checked. As far as the current staff were concerned, it should not have been recording anything at all. I want to explain, before I go further, why this mattered so much, because I think it says something important about how humanity chose to build its place among the stars. When Earth first joined the wider community of spacefaring civilizations, we were, by most measurements, weaker than almost everyone else at the table. We did not have the fastest ships. We did not have the most advanced weapons. What we had, instead, was a history, a long, brutal, complicated history of surviving a planet that had tried, in 1,000 different ways, to erase us before we ever learned to build a fire. Predators, plagues, ice ages, each other. We had learned, over hundreds of thousands of years, that survival depended on remembering, on keeping records, on refusing to let the truth of what happened to someone simply vanish because the person with power over them wanted it to. When Earth negotiated its entry into the Concord Treaties, our delegates insisted on clauses that other species found strange, even excessive. Redundant recording systems on every registered facility, built into the physical infrastructure itself rather than relying on active software that could be disabled remotely. Storage arrays designed to survive power loss, network failure, even deliberate sabotage, because our diplomats had learned, the hard way, that systems built only for good intentions eventually fail the people who need them most. Other species signed the clauses without much argument, mostly because they assumed the redundancy would never matter. They assumed, as most people do, that cruelty only happens where the powerful believe they can get away with it, and that simply installing enough oversight would prevent anyone from ever testing that theory. They were wrong, of course. Someone always tests the theory eventually. When I opened the flagged data from that hidden array, I expected a malfunction report, or perhaps evidence of an unregistered mining operation skimming resources off the books. I did not expect what I found. Hours of footage, fragmented and imperfect, showing a young woman restrained in a small gray room, surrounded by researchers who spoke about her in the clinical, detached language people use when they have convinced themselves that the person in front of them is not quite a person at all. I recognized the species designation in the file headers before I recognized anything else. Jeth Research Facility. Subject classification, human, listed under an old and deeply uncomfortable term still used in some scientific circles. Deathworld origin. I sat with that footage for a long time before I did anything else. I want to be honest about that. I did not immediately leap into action like the heroes in old stories. I sat, frozen, staring at a screen, feeling something cold settle into my chest that I did not have a name for yet. I have reviewed difficult footage before. Everyone in oversight work has. But there was something different about watching a facility that believed, with total confidence, that no one would ever see what it was doing. There is a particular kind of chill that comes from watching people behave as though the dark will keep their secrets forever, especially when you are the proof that it will not. I forwarded the footage immediately, flagged at the highest priority level our systems allowed, and within an hour I was patched into a call with 3 separate agencies, 2 of them human, 1 of them Concord Oversight Leadership. The human representative, a stern, quiet woman named Marisol Cade, asked me only one question before the call moved into logistics. She asked how long the footage had been accumulating. I checked the array's internal logs while she waited. The answer, when I found it, made the room go very quiet. 11 days. Continuous, uninterrupted, entirely unnoticed by the people responsible for it. Then, she's alive, Marisol said, more to herself than to any of us. If the footage is still coming in, she's alive. I did not know, at that point, who she meant by name. I only knew the designation listed in the subject file. It was not until later, once the extraction planning began in earnest, that I learned her name was Kira Voss, and that she had been listed as missing, presumed lost, along with the rest of her survey crew, for nearly 3 weeks. The next several hours moved faster than any shift I had worked in years. Marisol Cade coordinated with a small human response unit already positioned 2 systems away, closer to the facility than any Concord patrol vessel could reach in time. I learned, during that call, something I had not fully appreciated before about how human response protocols were structured. Most Concord member species relied on large, visible fleets to project authority and respond to crises, ships bristling with weapons meant to be seen as much as used. Humanity, by contrast, tended to favor small, precise teams for situations exactly like this one, extraction specialists. People trained not for open conflict, but for moving through hostile, uncertain environments with speed and control, minimizing risk to the person they were sent to retrieve. It is a philosophy question as much as a tactical one, Marisol explained to me, during a brief pause in the coordination call, while we waited for the response team to confirm their approach vector. A large fleet, arriving at a small unregistered facility, invites escalation. Someone panics, evidence gets destroyed, people get hurt in the chaos. A small team, moving quietly and quickly, gives the situation the best chance of ending the way we need it to end. Clean, documented, survivable. I asked her, somewhat naively I think now, whether she was worried the facility staff would notice the team approaching and try to hide what they had done before the extraction arrived. She was quiet for a moment, before she answered. They already believe no one is watching, she said. That belief is the only advantage we need. People who think they are unseen do not prepare for the possibility of being found. It makes them slow. It makes them careless. It is, frankly, the single greatest mistake anyone can make when they decide to hurt someone in the dark. I kept reviewing the footage in the hours that followed, not because I needed to, but because I felt, in some way I could not fully explain, that someone should. That the least I could do, sitting safely in my monitoring station while a response team moved into position, was witness what had happened to her properly, carefully, so that when the time came to present the evidence, nothing would be missing, nothing would be softened or explained away. I watched her count tiles on a wall. I watched her recite what I later learned were the names of plant species, in careful alphabetical order, her lips barely moving, as though she were holding on to the words the way a person holds onto a rope over open water. I watched a young guard, later identified as a low-ranking facility staff member named Patrick Shaw, glance repeatedly at the ceiling lens with an expression I recognized immediately, because I had felt something like it myself the first time I discovered footage that was never supposed to exist. Guilt. Fear. The dawning, uncomfortable understanding that the world is larger and more accountable than you had allowed yourself to believe. There is a particular moment in the footage that I have thought about often since, more than any of the others, though I will not describe most of what happened in that room in detail, because I do not think it is my place to turn her suffering into spectacle for anyone else's benefit. But there is one moment, near the end of the 11th day of recording, where she lifts her head toward the ceiling lens and speaks, so quietly that our audio systems nearly missed it entirely. "I see you too," she says. "Whatever you are, I see you looking away." I do not know if she believed, in that moment, that anyone would ever actually hear those words. I think, honestly, she did not. I think she said them the way people sometimes speak to the dark, simply because speaking to it is better than silence. Because the act of naming your own hope, even when you do not believe it will be answered, is sometimes the only way to keep believing in it at all. But I heard them. Days later, sitting in my monitoring station on the other side of a data relay she did not know existed, I heard exactly what she said, and I made sure everyone involved in the response effort heard it too. The response team's approach took just under 6 hours from the moment Marisol Cade authorized the operation. I spent most of that time continuing to review the footage, building a timeline, cross-referencing the facility's staff roster against the images captured in the recordings, identifying names, ranks, and the specific role each person had played in what had been done to her. It was slow, careful work, and I understood, even as I did it, that its purpose was not simply to support a rescue. It was to build something that could not be undone, argued away, or quietly buried once the immediate crisis had passed. A record, a complete, undeniable record, the kind that Earth's diplomats had insisted on decades earlier, precisely because they understood that rescue alone was never enough. The truth had to survive the rescue too. At one point during that long stretch of preparation, I received a brief update from the response team's commanding officer, a calm, unhurried voice that gave me more confidence than I expected it to. His name was Nolan Pierce, and he had clearly done this kind of work many times before, because his questions were precise, practical, entirely focused on the details that would matter once his team was inside the facility. How many hostile personnel? What layout the station's internal structure suggested? Where the subject was most likely being held, based on the pattern of footage I had reviewed. I answered as best I could, grateful, in a strange way, that my slow, careful hours of watching had produced something useful, something that might actually help. "She's been counting," I told him, near the end of the call, because it felt important to say, even though it was not strictly tactical information. In the footage, she counts things. Tiles, numbers, plant names. I think it's how she's staying steady. There was a pause on the line before Nolan Pierce answered. "Then she's steadier than most people would be in her position," he said. "That's good. That means she'll be ready to move fast when we get there." I did not know, at that point, exactly what would happen once the response team reached the facility. I only knew that the belief the facility staff had built their entire operation around, the confident, careless belief that no one would ever see what they were doing, had already begun to collapse, hours before a single member of the response team set foot inside the station. The cameras had not looked away forever. They had simply been waiting, patient and unblinking, for the right person to finally ask the right question. I stayed at my post through the final approach, watching the response team's status updates scroll across my screen, feeling the particular kind of helplessness that comes from being essential to an operation while also being entirely unable to affect its outcome directly. I thought about Kira Voss, counting tiles in a small gray room, unaware that 11 days of quiet, uninterrupted footage had already traveled farther than she could have imagined, into hands that were now moving, quickly and precisely, to make sure the dark finally ran out of places to hide. I thought, too, about my grandmother's stories, though I had no way of knowing, at the time, that Kira had been thinking about her own grandmother's garden in that same gray room, hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. It is strange, in hindsight, how much the two of us were thinking about the same idea, without ever having met. That some things grow slowly, quietly, invisibly, in the dark, and that this does not mean they are not growing. It only means that the moment they finally break the surface arrives all at once, sudden and undeniable, exactly when it is needed most. The final update came through just under an hour later. Response team has reached the facility perimeter, beginning extraction protocol. I read those words on my screen, and for the first time since I had opened that flagged data file, I allowed myself to believe, fully and without reservation, that Kira Voss was about to learn something the facility staff had never intended for her to learn. That the cameras had never truly looked away at all. They had simply been waiting for someone like me to finally look back. The first thing I notice is the silence and how wrong it feels. This station has a sound to it, a low constant hum of recycled air and distant machinery that I have grown so used to that I no longer consciously hear it, the way you stop hearing your own heartbeat after a while. But sitting in the chair, waiting for the next chime, waiting for the door to open the way it always does, I realize the hum has changed pitch. Somewhere deep in the station's structure, something has shifted. Petrick notices it too. He is at his usual post near the console, and I watch him go very still, his head tilting slightly, the way a person listens when they are not sure yet whether they actually heard something or only imagined it. A moment later, the lighting in the corridor outside flickers, just once. Amber, then back to its usual pale white, and Petrick's hand drifts toward the comm panel on his wrist. "Report," he says quietly, and waits. Nothing answers. I do not know, in that moment, what is happening. I only know that something has changed, and change, in a place like this, has always meant something worse before. I brace myself out of habit, the way I have learned to brace for every new session, every new adjustment, every new attempt by Dren Yol to find the reaction his charts insist should exist. But this feels different. There is no clinical calm to it, no measured curiosity. There is only Petrick, standing rigid by the door, listening to a silence that clearly frightens him more than anything Dren Yol has ever ordered him to do. The door opens, but it is not Dren Yol who enters. It is another researcher, older, with a deep furrow between his eyes that suggests he has been running rather than walking. He speaks to Petrick in their own clicking language, low and urgent, and though I cannot understand the words, I understand the shape of the conversation immediately, the way you understand an argument in a language you do not speak, simply by watching the faces of the people having it. Something has gone wrong. Something they did not plan for. Something that has, in the space of a few minutes, turned their confident, unseen little station into a place suddenly full of fear. I sit very still and listen, cataloging every detail the way I have trained myself to catalog everything in this room. The researcher leaves as quickly as he arrived. Petrick does not follow him. Instead, he turns toward me, and for the first time since I arrived on this station, I see something in his expression that is not fear of his superiors. It is fear of what is coming, mixed with something else, something that looks almost like relief. "What's happening?" I ask him, keeping my voice low and steady, the same voice I used the day he told me everything still gets written somewhere. He hesitates only a moment before he answers. "Something has entered the outer perimeter," he says. Undetected until it was already inside the station's defensive range. Director Yole believes it is a malfunction in our sensor grid. I do not think it is a malfunction. My heart begins to beat faster, though I keep my face carefully neutral, the same careful neutrality I have practiced through every session in this room. What do you think it is? I ask. Petrick looks at the ceiling lens, the same small dark eye that has haunted and comforted me in equal measure since the day I arrived. I think it is exactly what Director Yole has spent 11 days insisting could never find us, he says. I do not have time to ask anything else, because the lights in the corridor flicker again, longer this time, and somewhere down the hall I hear a sound I have not heard since before I woke up on this station. Footsteps, not the careful, measured footsteps of the Jreth staff, who move through their own facility with the quiet efficiency of people who have never once had to worry about being interrupted. These footsteps are different. Fast, precise, deliberate, the sound of people who know exactly where they are going and exactly how little time they intend to spend getting there. Petrick backs away from the door, his hand still hovering near the comm panel, though he no longer seems to know what he intends to do with it. I strain against the restraints, not out of any real hope of freeing myself, but simply because my body wants to move toward whatever is coming, the same way a plant turns toward light even before it understands what light is. The door opens again, and this time it is not a researcher. A figure steps through, dressed in dark, unmarked tactical gear, moving with the calm, unhurried confidence of someone who has done this exact kind of work more times than he could easily count. His eyes find me first, scanning quickly, professionally, checking for injury before checking for anything else. Then his gaze shifts to Petrick, who has raised both hands slowly, unprompted, in a gesture that needs no translation in any language. Kira Voss, the man says, and it is not a question. His voice is calm, steady, the kind of voice built for exactly this moment. My name is Nolan Pierce. I'm here to bring you home. I do not cry, though some distant part of me expects that I should. Instead, I find myself laughing, a short, disbelieving sound that surprises even me, because after 11 days of counting tiles and reciting plant names to keep myself from breaking, the sound of my own name, spoken by someone who has come to save me, feels almost too strange to be real. Took you long enough, I manage, and Nolan Pierce's mouth twitches, almost a smile, as he moves to release the restraints. We only found out you were here 11 hours ago, he says, working quickly and carefully at the locking mechanism. The footage came through a relay this facility didn't know still existed, 11 days of it. Every single session, Kira. All of it recorded, all of it sent, none of it erased. I go very still at that, my wrists finally free, my hands trembling slightly as the blood returns to them. 11 days, every session. I think of the small dark lens above me, the one I whispered to in the quiet hours, half convinced I was speaking to nothing at all. I see you too, I had said. Whatever you are. I see you looking away. It had not been looking away at all. It had simply been watching from somewhere Dren Yole never thought to check. They said no one would see, I say, my voice rougher than I intend. They were wrong, Nolan Pierce says simply, helping me to my feet. My legs are unsteady, but I refuse to let them buckle. Not now, not in front of Petrick, not in front of anyone who spent the last 11 days believing I would eventually give them the reaction their charts predicted. Can you walk? I can walk, I say, and I mean it, even though every part of my body argues otherwise. We move through the corridor together, Nolan Pierce, keeping one hand near my shoulder without quite touching me, the way someone moves beside a person they are ready to catch, but do not want to treat as though they have already fallen. Behind us, 2 more members of his team secure Petrick, and I catch a fragment of conversation as we pass. Petrick's voice, low and urgent, offering something, information perhaps, or cooperation, in exchange for whatever leniency the situation might still allow him. I do not know, in that moment, what will happen to Petrick. Some part of me, The part that remembers his hesitation, his half-spoken warning about storage arrays and permanent records, wants to believe he deserves a different fate than the one waiting for Drenyol. But I am too tired, too raw, too focused on simply putting one foot in front of the other to spend much time weighing that question yet. It is a problem for later. Right now, there is only the corridor, and the sound of Nolan Pierce's steady footsteps beside mine, and the growing, disbelieving certainty that I am actually leaving this place. We find Drenyol near the facility's central operations room, flanked by 2 more members of the extraction team, his data slate still clutched in one thin hand as though it might somehow protect him. He looks smaller than he did in the observation room, stripped of the clinical authority he wore so easily when I was the one strapped to the chair. His clicking voice, when he speaks, has lost its earlier confidence entirely. This facility operates under a limited research charter, he says, directing the words at Nolan Pierce, though his eyes flick briefly to me, then away, as though he cannot quite decide where it is safe to look. You have no jurisdiction here. Whatever you believe you have found, I assure you, there has been a significant misunderstanding. Nolan Pierce does not raise his voice. He does not need to. 11 days of continuous recording, he says, his tone as calm and unhurried as it was in the observation room, though something colder has settled beneath it now. Every session, every instrument you used, every reading on your data slate, all of it already logged with the Concord Oversight Division and Earth's diplomatic mission 3 sectors away. There is no misunderstanding, Director Yol. There is only the record, and the record is very clear. I watch something in Drenyol's face shift as those words land, a slow, dawning collapse of the confidence he has carried since the first day I arrived on this station. For 11 days, he insisted, again and again, that this sector reported to no one, that we were, for all purposes, unseen. I remember the exact certainty in his voice the first time he said it, the way a man speaks a fact he has never once had to test. I think, watching him now, that some part of him is only now beginning to understand what it means to have that certainty proven wrong in front of the one person he spent 11 days convinced would never have the chance to see it happen. You do not understand, he says, and for the first time, there is something almost pleading in his clicking voice. The research conducted here serves a legitimate purpose. Deathworld physiology remains poorly understood. The data collected. The data collected, I say, my voice cutting through his sentence before I have fully decided to speak, was collected from a person, Director Yol, not a specimen, a person. You spent 11 days trying to prove I wasn't one. I spent 11 days making sure I stayed exactly who I was, no matter what you did to try to change that. He does not answer. I do not think he has an answer. Not one that would survive being spoken aloud in front of the extraction team, or the record that Nolan Pierce has just confirmed already exists, permanent and undeniable, in hands far beyond this station's reach. Nolan Pierce steps between us gently, not pushing me away, simply positioning himself so that the conversation can end without needing anything further from me. We're leaving, he says quietly, and I nod, grateful, in a way I do not fully have words for yet, that he understands I have said everything I need to say. As we move through the final corridor toward the extraction shuttle, I glance back once, toward the small dark lens set into the ceiling above the operations room, the same kind of lens that watched over every session in that small gray room. I do not know if it is still recording. I do not know if it matters anymore, now that the record it kept has already done exactly what it was built to do, but I look at it anyway, and for the first time since I arrived on this station, I do not whisper anything to it at all. I simply nod, once, the way you nod to someone who kept a promise you were not entirely sure they would keep. The shuttle door closes behind us, and the last thing I hear from the facility is Drenyol's voice, still arguing, still insisting on legitimacy and misunderstanding, growing fainter and fainter until the corridor swallows it entirely. I sit down in one of the shuttle's narrow seats, and Nolan Pierce settles across from me, watching me, with the same careful, professional attention he has shown since the moment he stepped through that door. "You did good," he says quietly, as the shuttle begins to pull away from the station. "Staying steady like that, it's not easy." "I counted," I tell him, and my voice finally begins to shake, now that there is no one left in the room who would have taken satisfaction in watching it happen. Tiles, numbers, plant names, I just kept counting. Nolan Pierce nods, as though this makes perfect sense to him, and perhaps it does. "Sounds like it worked," he says. I look out the small viewport as the station shrinks behind us, smaller and smaller, until it is nothing more than a dark shape against the endless field of stars. I think about Dren Yol's confident, careless certainty that this place would remain unseen forever. I think about the small dark lens that never truly looked away, only waited, patient and unblinking, for the moment someone finally came looking, and I think, for the first time in 11 days, that I might actually be allowed to stop counting soon, and simply rest. I spend the first 2 days after the extraction sleeping more than I have ever slept in my life, waking only long enough to eat, to answer a few gentle questions from a medical team aboard the transport vessel, and then to sleep again, as though my body finally understands it is allowed to rest and has decided to make up for 11 lost days all at once. When I am finally steady enough to sit up and hold a conversation without my voice shaking, Marisol Cade comes to see me in person, the human oversight coordinator whose name I had heard once, briefly, through the static of the extraction shuttle's comm channel. She is not what I expected. I had pictured someone sharp and formal, the kind of official who speaks in careful, distant sentences designed to avoid saying anything that might later be quoted back at them. Instead, she sits down across from me with an unhurried patience that reminds me, oddly, of my grandmother, and she does not ask me a single question about what happened in that gray room. Not yet. Instead, she asks about my crew. Colin Marsh and Priya Ferris are both alive, she tells me, and I feel something in my chest loosen that I had not realized was still clenched so tightly. They were recovered from a separate holding location 2 days ago, closer to the original ambush site. Both are recovering well. They have been asking about you constantly. I do not cry, not exactly, but something close to it happens behind my eyes, a hot pressure that I let sit there without trying to force it back down, the way I forced everything down, for 11 days in that room. Marisol waits, patient, unbothered, letting the silence be whatever it needs to be. "You'll be able to see them soon," she says eventually. "But first, I need to ask if you're willing to talk about what happened. Not for me, for the record, for what comes next." I think about that question for a long moment, turning it over the way I used to turn over Petrick's half-spoken warning, weighing its weight before I decide what to do with it. 11 days ago, I would have said no, or perhaps I would not have had the strength to say anything at all. But something has shifted in me since the shuttle door closed behind Nolan Pierce, and I watched that station shrink into darkness behind us. I am not the same woman who woke up strapped to that chair, and I am not entirely sure yet who I have become instead, but I know this much. I am not going to let Dren Yol's confident certainty about being unseen turn out to be even partially true, not in any way that matters. "I'll talk," I say, "all of it, whatever you need." Over the following days, I give a full account, not just to Marisol Cade, but to a small, careful team assembled specifically to build the case against the facility and everyone who worked within it. I learned things during those sessions that I did not know while I was still locked inside that gray room, things that reshaped the story I had been telling myself to survive it. I learned that the facility's charter, the one Dren Yol invoked so confidently in his final moments before the shuttle door closed, had already expired 8 months earlier, quietly lapsed through a bureaucratic oversight that no one had bothered to correct, because no one expected the facility's research to matter enough for anyone to check. I learned that Dren Yol had submitted, over the preceding 2 years, several requests for expanded authorization to study what his files called Deathworld resilience thresholds, and that every single request had been denied by the appropriate research ethics board, on the grounds that the proposed methodology violated basic protections for sentient test subjects regardless of species origin. He had simply continued the work anyway, quietly, confident that a facility positioned far enough from major relay points would never be checked closely enough to notice. I learned, too, about the storage array that saved me, the one Petrick had mentioned in that brief, careful conversation I still remember word for word. It turns out the array had been built into the station's original construction decades earlier, during a period when the facility operated under a different charter entirely, one that had included stricter Concord oversight requirements. When the charter changed hands and the requirements loosened, the array had simply been left in place, forgotten, still quietly logging everything within its range because no one had ever bothered to formally decommission it. Owen Bright, the monitoring officer whose diligent work I would later learn had found the footage in the first place, tells me during one of our conversations that he believes it was pure chance that a routine diagnostic sweep flagged the array at all. I do not entirely believe him. I think, though I cannot prove it, that some quiet, careful part of the system that built these protocols in the first place was designed exactly to make that kind of chance a little more likely than pure chance should allow. We built redundancy into everything, Owen tells me, during a conversation over a secure comm link, weeks after the extraction, once I have been cleared to speak with the people involved in finding me. Not because we expected this specific situation, because we've learned over and over that someone eventually tests every gap we leave unguarded, so we try to leave as few gaps as possible. I think about that sentence often in the months that follow, as the case against the facility slowly makes its way through Concord and Earth jurisdictional review. Dren Yol is formally charged under both Concord research ethics statutes and a specific human treaty provision that Earth's delegates had insisted on decades earlier, one that extends legal protection to any human citizen, regardless of where in Concord space they are held, provided a verifiable record of their treatment exists. His defense argues, at length, that the facility's isolation and expired charter placed it outside the treaty's jurisdiction entirely. The argument fails, decisively, once the full 11 days of footage are entered into evidence. The facility's research license is permanently revoked. Dren Yol is removed from all future research authorization on any Concord-registered world, a sentence that, I am told, effectively ends his career entirely. Petrick Show's case unfolds differently. I am asked, at one point, whether I wish to provide a statement regarding his conduct, and I take longer than I expect to decide what to say. In the end, I tell the truth, all of it, including the moment he told me that everything still gets written somewhere, and the moment his eyes flicked toward the ceiling lens with something that looked, even then, like the beginning of conscience. I do not know whether my statement changes the outcome of his case significantly. I am told, eventually, that he receives a reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation with the investigation, along with a permanent restriction from any future research or detention facility work. I do not know if that is justice. I only know that it feels to me like the right kind of complicated answer to a question that never had a simple one. Colin Marsh and Priya Ferris meet me at a small transit station 3 weeks after the extraction, and I do not remember much of the reunion clearly, only that Colin cried before I did, loudly and without any embarrassment at all, and that Priya held onto my shoulders for a long moment before she said anything, as though she needed to confirm with her own hands that I was actually real before she trusted her voice to work properly. We do not talk, that day, about what happened to any of us during those 3 weeks apart. There will be time for that later, slowly, carefully, the way most difficult things eventually get talked about between people who trust each other enough to wait. I return to Earth briefly, months later, once the legal proceedings have concluded and I am cleared for extended leave. I visit my grandmother's garden, the one she still tends despite her age, despite my repeated gentle suggestions that she consider hiring help. She does not ask me many questions about what happened. She simply hands me a trowel and puts me to work turning soil beside her, the way she used to when I was small, and we work in comfortable silence for most of the afternoon, until she finally speaks. "You always did like counting things," she says, not looking up from the row of vegetables she is tending. "Even as a little girl, counting steps, counting stars, counting how many bites it took to finish your dinner. It helped," I tell her. "In there, counting helped me stay myself." She nods, unsurprised, as though this is exactly the answer she expected. "Your great-grandmother used to say something similar," she says, "about the war she lived through, before you were born. She said the ones who survived the worst of it were usually the ones who found something small and steady to hold on to, a number, a prayer, a name. It didn't much matter what it was, so long as it was theirs, and no one could take it from them." I think about that conversation often, in the years that follow, as I slowly return to something resembling my old life, though I am careful never to pretend I have returned to exactly the person I was before. I go back to deep space service eventually, though it takes longer than I expect, and I choose, deliberately, to specialize in a new area of study alongside my original field, something that did not exist as a formal discipline until relatively recently: Deathworld resilience research, properly conducted, ethically governed, built around consent and dignity rather than confinement and curiosity. I do not do this work to prove Dren Yol wrong, exactly, though I will admit there is some quiet satisfaction in that particular irony. I do it because I understand now, in a way I did not fully understand before, why my grandmother cared so much about that old argument regarding cameras and accountability, and the dark. Somewhere out among the stars, on stations and outposts I will likely never visit, there are still people who believe, with the same confident carelessness Dren Yol once carried, that isolation means invisibility, that distance means safety from consequence, that a dark enough corner of the map will never be checked closely enough to matter. They are wrong, all of them, though most of them will not learn how wrong until the moment their own quiet storage array gets flagged by someone like Owen Bright, patient and thorough, doing a job that most people never think about until it matters more than almost anything else. I keep, in a small drawer in my quarters, a printed record of the exact moment Nolan Pierce stepped through that door and said my name for the first time since the ambush. I do not look at it often, but I know it is there, the same way I once knew, without proof, that the small dark lens above me was not looking away forever, only waiting for the right moment to prove exactly how much it had seen. They believed no one would see them hurting the Deathworld girl. They believed the isolation of that small, forgotten station made them safe from every promise Earth had ever written into its treaties, every redundant system, every stubborn insistence on permanence that other species had signed without fully understanding why it mattered so much to us. They were wrong about all of it, and I have come to believe, in the years since, that this is not an accident, not a lucky coincidence born from one overlooked storage array. It is exactly what my species built, deliberately, patiently, out of a long and difficult history of learning that survival depends on refusing to let the truth disappear simply because someone with power wanted it to. The cameras did not look away forever. Nothing built by people who remember what it means to be hunted ever truly does. Somewhere, quietly, patiently, the record is always still being kept, waiting for the moment someone finally comes looking, and I have learned, in the most difficult way possible, that eventually, someone always does.